So, JD, you're the CEO of Raygun and you do application performance monitoring. I was taking a look at the performance of my application, but I don't have any users yet. So I just I wrote a script. I kind of know how they're going to move through the application. And then I ran it under load, under Raygun, and I feel pretty good about how the users are going to experience my application. Was that a good idea?
I mean, that is a good idea. It gives you a baseline understanding. But the reality is, as the famous quote says, everybody has a plan until they're punched in the face. Once your code goes out into the wild, your users are in different geolocations, bigger lag, different devices, all sorts of things can change the behavior of the users. And that's why in an ideal environment, you have a combination of both a synthetic type test and you're collecting real user information about the performance and experience they have.
And that's the power of Raygun. It gives you real user monitoring, allowing you to identify, resolve those front-end performance issues that are impacting real users in real time, the real way that they use your application. You can sign up for a free trial at raygun.com. Hi, I'm Scott Hansel, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, I'm chatting with Nyari Samushonga. She is the CEO of WeThinkCode, a South African tech academy with offices in Joburg, Durban, and Cape Town. How are you?
I am very well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm very well and very happy to be chatting with you today. So, a tech academy, and you have 3 different cities that you're in?
Actually, we're in 3 cities, but we have 4 campuses. So, we recently opened the second one in Joburg, and another one is loading for September. So really exciting times.
That is brilliant. Okay. So we hear terms like boot camp. In the US here, we have trade schools, community colleges. I went to a community college. What is a tech academy in your mind, and why do you call it a tech academy?
So in my mind, tech academy is a place where young people, whether they've coded in the past or not, are able to come and over a period of, in our case, 16 months, actually acquire work-relevant skills. So when they come out of the academy, our view is that they should be ready for the workplace. So think police academy, something similar to that.
16 months is no joke. I hear about these boot camps here in the US that are like, you can learn JavaScript in 6 weeks. And then 16 months, that's a conscious decision to really grind for a year plus.
Absolutely. You can learn something about JavaScript in 6 weeks, but you're definitely not going from zero to being useful to anybody. And our context is very specific, right, Scott? South Africa has a very high rate of youth unemployment, and that youth unemployment trends very much towards the socioeconomic bracket that someone is born in. So we have the highest income inequality in the world, well, at least in the places where they measure it. And 6% of adults in South Africa have a university degree. And so when we set up WeThinkCode, the focus was very much on, the 94% that are getting left behind and in many cases condemned to a life of no opportunity actually have a hell of a lot to add to our economy, to add to our community as technologists, and to add to just world problems being solved. And so the idea is when we recruit, we actively target people who are generally left out of tech and yet demonstrate a high aptitude for it. And so when you take an individual from that circumstance and you want to give them a fair shake at actually building a career, then we believe 16 months is the least amount of time that you need to be able to do that. And that's why it takes, quote unquote, so long.
What does that mean to you, the idea of aptitude for tech? Why do you think some people are wired that way and some people aren't? And then how do you identify if someone who's been given few opportunities has an aptitude?
So I would say wired for it is somebody who has the curiosity, because tech is one of those things where, the best of training you can get essentially hands you a toolbox. And then you arrive on site and you realize that full as your toolbox is, you don't have all the tools, you've got some of the tools, and then you start to figure it out. And literally in that theater of struggle, you get to be productive in some way or the other. And so essentially what we're looking for is that combination of a curiosity, a determination to solve a problem, being more interested in asking the question than quickly getting to an answer, and then trying to pattern match Does it quack like a duck? No, it looks like a dove. Oh, let me check again. I think it's a chicken. Because that's really what I see tech as being. And so the aptitude, I see it on the one hand as cognitively, those kinds of traits, analytical, logical, problem solving. And then on the other side, behavioral, determination, persistence, attention to detail. And when you kind of bring those things together, then people can be technologists. And I think the other aspect of it for us is when you look at the world of tech, it is so, so broad. Even when you narrow it down to software, it's still so, so broad. And I think historically, there's been this view that we want the strongest mathematician, the person who's strongest in physics to, be a software developer. And what the reality of today shows us is while there's definitely a need and a place for that kind of capability in certain aspects of software development, there's actually a range of other ones that don't require that depth of mathematical skill and background. And so for us, when we go out to look, we try to not filter with the traditional kind of one-dimensional, did you ace every maths exam you ever saw, and take a more pragmatic perspective that says, how do you reason? How do you apply? And how do you handle yourself?
I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but there are stereotypes or maybe even mythology about Africans as problem solvers who are solving problems through constraints, through a lack of resources, even though the continent has so many resources.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a positive stereotype? Is that a true thing? And is that something that makes perhaps an African youth a uniquely positioned technologist as someone who is working problems with constraints, which is something that we do in computers?
I absolutely think it's a strength. And the reason that I say that is I think in tech generally, we always work with a constraint. And if you look at the development of the power of software, it's about, clearing one constraint and then discovering the next one, whether that's about how much data we can store, how fast we can, compute over data that we've stored, how we can project information, how we can transmit it from one place to the next, etc. And over time, as each of these problems get solved, because they're constraining us from something we want to achieve, we open up into a new kind of world of innovation. And so, to me, universally, constraint is an amazing motivator for creativity. Now, when that constraint is almost in many ways about a primal factor, your hunger, your health, your housing, your family, your well-being, I think the motivation to then solve increases. And then I think the frugality that comes from being motivated to solve a real-life problem with limited resources is an interesting perspective that many Africans can bring to the table, because there's a kind of practicality that's there that I think is missing from the world. But then also I think just the flavor. I'm African, born and raised in Zimbabwe, actually. And then I live in South Africa now. I've spent some time in Tanzania. I've lived in the US and I've worked around the world. And one of the things you realize whenever you step off a plane in a new place is that it has its own vibe. And I genuinely feel there's the moral imperative around inclusion of the African voice and the African perspective, about empowering the African technologists to be able to solve their own problems with this tool that is technology. But there's also kind of the fun side of it, which is, I've enjoyed stepping off a plane and suddenly I'm in China and I can't read a single character and everything is just not what I know. And my brain opens up a certain way as I experience, this difference. And I think that's the other reason why having more technologists coming out of Africa is so important. And so for WeThinkCode, why training technologists as people who otherwise wouldn't have such an opportunity is so important, because then you get both the power of our brand of innovation, but also just our vibe.
One of the things that makes me the happiest about technology in general, both software and hardware, is it's all these tools that I have in my toolbox. When you introduce a new WeThinkCode bootcamp member to these tools, do you get to see them kind of like bloom and blossom and go, wow, I didn't realize, I know what an Android phone is, but now I can make an app. Or I know that a website was a thing, but now I can make a web API. And do they
Oh,
just
yeah.
start like all the neurons start firing and they want to start solving the world's problems?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And all of them all at once, right? Like not one problem at a time. No, no, no. Absolutely. I think what's actually so interesting is because we work with young people, often from underserved communities. So they're coming from families where when they step on our campus, they haven't really had access to a computer a lot, if at all, before. And we're starting out with like proper basics. And there's a big intimidation factor. So think about imposter syndrome, but amped to the max, where it's like, I'm scared to break it. I'm scared I don't know what I'm doing. I'm scared that I can't even. And then gradually this courage to tinker. And then the point of, oh, and I can make something. And that makes my job one of the best jobs in the world. It's just such a joy. And to realize that you're going to be okay out there because you're owning it now. It's yours. I just need to get out of your way.
There's this thing that I felt when I was growing up in computers, which was this low self-esteem of not having access to one until later. So, that there were the kids that always had computers on their block. That's kind of a technology. Is that a fair statement? A technology low self-esteem where like, oh, I've never had a PC in my home, or when I got my Commodore 64, the kid down the block had a bigger, better computer or a faster phone or whatever. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Absolutely. And so we make a conscious effort to make sure we have good quality hardware on campus and to try and have the network and all of that be really good. You kind of want to get the machine out of the way of the learning, even though you are learning about talking to the machine. And so I think you definitely get that a lot. And then you get the social stigma as well. Each of us as individuals wakes up with our own sense of what can I or can't I do? And in computing, it's exactly like you describe. So I'm going to sit and compete or collaborate even with these people that have had access to these things, and you perceive them to be something else. And then the society itself then starts to whisper either, we don't think you should be here, or explicitly, I don't think tech is for girls, and suddenly all the voices that were in your own head find resonance with the voices outside, because that's the monster that insecurity is. It's hunting for company. It's hunting for validation. And in this context, there's tons of it. You've worked in tech long enough to know that even as a professional yourself, you'll still walk into a room and there's still that louder person in the corner who's there to tell you they have all the answers. And I think those are some of the scenarios that are there. And what we're trying to do is create an environment that lowers that anxiety. And just from a cultural perspective, is more about collaboration and peer-to-peer learning than about absolute competition. Because one of the things you start to see with software is brilliance in software is a growing pie. It's not a finite size opportunity where it's like the Olympics and it's either you're Usain Bolt or you're not. It's a quite broader world. And the more people we add, the bigger the pie gets and the more opportunity and success there is there. And I think that's a cultural aspect that we also try to inculcate into the environment, which is you are worthy and you matter, but also you're going to make it all better by being a part of it. So please join. I hope that's landing.
In post-apartheid South Africa, there's still the looming history. Is there a sense amongst Black folks getting involved in coding that it's a white job and that white folks have all the secrets? Did they have computers growing up, and do they have like a 10-year head start or a many 100-year head start? And do you have to kind of break that down?
One thing I like about talking to you is that you always you go there. So yes, absolutely. And interestingly, in South Africa, it's not just a white profession; it's a white man profession. So when you look at representation within tech in South Africa, it's predominantly white male. And you'll find the same level of insecurity or structural barrier that exists for Black folk in many ways exists for white women. And the general state of South Africa is like this continued where you get to a point of political freedom. And so now there aren't signs that say I can't be here. Literally the campus where I sit is a place that during apartheid I wouldn't be allowed there. And yet now I can, in that way move and be there. But then the structures and the vestiges of it stay. And they're the ones that keep the majority of Black talent growing up in communities that aren't as well served. They don't have access to computers. Their homes don't have access to, reliable power supply. And with the power woes we have right now, it's even worse in that context. Data is expensive and not accessible. And when the schools do get computers, they don't have faculty in those poorer neighborhoods know how to teach you or what to teach you with computers. So often the computers are locked up in a lab. If you can get to the computer for 30 minutes, you're lucky. And when you get to it, someone has you working in Office 365. And so those kinds of aspects come into play where layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of barrier prevents individuals from participating fully. And what we're trying to do is peel away the layers that are structural problems, that are social problems, and then get to the practicality of there's still a lot of work to do. Once you're in the chair and once you're feeling confident, you've never coded before and we've got 16 months. So it's actually still quite a grind. Like we're not cutting any corners or cutting you any slack. Quite the contrary, because of the odds that are against you on the other end of this pipe, we're pushing quite hard.
Yeah, I want to dig more into that and into the syllabus of We Think Code, but I also want to back up for a second. And for context for our listeners, you've been a CEO for 4, going on 5 years, but you also worked as a managing director at ThoughtWorks. You worked at Deloitte for a decade. You must have walked into a room somewhere in the world multiple times where you were training in a room of IT people, and you were the only Black woman, and you were the leader of the class, and a bunch of 50-year-old white guys that look like me were there to learn from you. when tell me that's happened, and what did it feel like?
Oh, so often. I think at the beginning it was very intimidating because, like you say, I came from Deloitte and an accounting background and shifted into technology. So I had my own internal imposters things. Before anyone said anything to me, I was kind of waking up and coming from a world where I was quite expert. And at the ripe old age of 30, decide this is a good time to start again. And I talk about that transition and walking into rooms, and initially grad students are running circles around me. And I have over a decade of work under my belt. And it's, but it's what I wanted because I had gotten to a point where I wasn't intellectually stimulated anymore. But then I kind of get past that and I learn and I know I can be productive. And then I'm walking into spaces, and there's a thing I try to describe to people about inclusion, because I know sometimes it gets very sensitive the moment you raise it. Someone who is of a better represented group tends to feel like you're picking on them and saying something about them. And yet my experience of it is just by walking in a room where no one looks or sounds like you, it's almost like, if you stumbled into the men's bathroom, you walk in and you feel like I shouldn't be here. Not because the men are like, get out the bathroom, which they probably would be, but because you just look around and you're like, not a fit, let me get out. And then you have to fight internally that aspect of self-exclusion where, and I know Sheryl Sandberg is controversial on many different levels, but one of the things that I appreciate about Lean In is reading it in many ways felt like she had been spying on my life. This idea of I get there and I feel that apprehension and I literally pull back because I shouldn't be here. And training myself to literally lean in, take a seat and participate. And I've got nothing to lose. I mean, I'm not here to be the best at anything or smarter than anyone. I've come with a set of skills. Usually I've got a particular job to do and I'm going to get on with it. So that was the starting of it. And then comes the part of the perception that other people have of me. Usually that maybe I'm the secretary or I'm the project manager. And so there's those assumptions. And the interesting thing with those assumptions is people actually apply them seemingly quite politely. So the way you would treat the secretary quite politely because they deserve respect is the way I get treated. And it's like, sorry, actually, I'll be sitting up here in the facilitator's chair and you're over there and, we can both have some tea. That's cool, but that's not what I'm here to do. And so I think watching people's faces change, and as they grapple with their own stereotype in their head is incredibly interesting, because firstly, then you just do the most basic thing and you're over complimented because you've blown the lights compared to where their expectation was for you down on the ground, if not below it. You constructed a sentence and, you don't sound like a complete bumbling idiot. And then thereafter, when you start to actually get into it and show your expertise, and then they realize they're learning from you, there's another moment where it's like, with some people, it short circuits. And so that's been a really interesting journey, both in terms of how other people experience me, but also for me not having a chip on my shoulder and trying to make sure that things that are about other people remain being about other people, and that I don't allow a lot of the stuff to attach to me and start to inform, my behavior. U2 has an interesting line in one of their songs: choose your enemies carefully, because in some ways they will define you. And I think that's one of the things that I've observed, is that what it simply is oftentimes is that people are unfamiliar. The instances of outright hostility have actually been a lot fewer than the awkwardness of unfamiliarity on both sides. And I think once you realize that humanity in a lot of people, then you kind of settle down, because you're like, yeah, it's going to be awkward, but we're going to get over it. And when we get over it, we're going to learn from each other and we're going to get it done. And so then you become a lot more chilled. And I think when you're more chilled, it's like holding a baby. When you're more relaxed, they're less likely to scream. If they're screaming and they sense your fear, they've got your number. And so that's the way I perceive it.
Our identities, of course, are what we look like, and what someone looks at us and sees are not just color, but also gender, also perceived age. And I've also noticed size. You are petite, you present as young, but you have a lot of experience. Is it just skin color, or is it also being a petite, young presenting woman who is also Black? Does that whole pie chart of identity all kind of like work against you?
Yeah. And immigrant.
Yeah.
And I think it does in some ways, but also not. There's a privilege to being underestimated. I think the challenge is when you can't get into rooms. And I think there's been maybe two phases of my career. The phase of my career when that was a reason where I couldn't get in. And that's very painful, because you're trying your level best and, the treatment isn't there. And across, like you say, because of the intersection, if we can call it, of identity aspects that play against me, I think one of the things that I would observe is immediately people would say things that are dismissive. So people will meet me and I'm the CEO, and someone will say, literally, how is this little girl the CEO? And I think in African language, that kind of forthright, disenfranchising language can be quite normalized. And so someone will say jokingly, like, this little girl is the CEO. But at least now I'm the CEO. So I'm in the room. And, because of a range of things, including, because now I've acquired some privilege in the same way that I come at it with certain disadvantages. And with that privilege, I'm able to navigate the space. Because I'm underestimated, people will tend to allow me to get on with what I'm doing for a little bit longer, because like, what is she, So I tend to get less of the kind of bro direct hit clashes that when people see you walk in and they size you up, I observe with colleagues that are white and tall and male. I get a different, oh yeah. And then I can sit in a corner and get on with it. And then because I'm a quite assertive person when it comes to expressing myself, you will hear what I have to say. And so before I'm ready to say it, I'm happy to let you and your assumptions swim. But then by the time I get to the point where I'm like, okay, let's talk business now. And over the years, to compensate for that, I've been a chronic over-preparer. I walk into a room expecting that my gender, my race, my age, my nationality, my appearance, all of those things come together, and people don't expect me to be competent. So I take myself a bit too seriously maybe sometimes, but I really, really prepare so that when it's prime time, I can be a credit to myself. And because in such a context, you're, theoretically breaking a glass ceiling, what you do with that opportunity, unfortunately, is caused to cascade and reflect on other people. So Nyari messes up, can Black women code? But Scott messes up, Scott did a bad job. And so it's one of those things where you then carry those kinds of layers of responsibility to yourself and often to others on your shoulders. But I feel like it's made me rise up to a better version of myself in, needing to be prepared, needing to be competent, and needing to get the job done.
Well, then this is a perfect transition then, thinking about the syllabus of We Think Code and what you are doing. It's not 6 weeks in JavaScript and then you just send them out into the world. It's 16 months. And is it true it's 6 days a week for 16 months?
It's 5 days a week, minimum 40 hours a day. So they end up coming in
40 hours a week.
Yeah. 40 hours a week. 40 hours a week.
40 hours a day would be a real serious boot camp. Yeah. Let's go.
They end up coming on Saturdays because the workload it's a lot of work. And so, yeah, intense.
This is a tough question. Why would someone drop out? Does it just get too hot? It's just too much. It's just too much workload. And like you're saying that you're finding people who have a knack, but then what would cause them to drop out? It might be transport, or it might be something that's not wired, that they're not, that's not clicking for them.
So we put in a lot of wraparound support. So our program is tuition free. So the people we select to train with us don't pay any fees. The people that plan to employ them at the end pay their tuition in advance and then compete for headcount at the end. So that's one barrier we're taking out. The second is we disperse a stipend to our students, which is a small amount that enables them to be able to travel to and from campus, or if they're from another city, afford some basic student housing, and then they'll still need to top up, but it at least gives them a leg up. So we're trying to reduce the barrier to accessing funding and accessing the campus. And then we have psychosocial support on campus. So we have professional counselors that the student can book one-on-one sessions with. But culturally, my people, we don't like counseling. We don't talk about our problems. So the other thing that we do is we look for themes that come from the one-on-one sessions as well as the expertise of the social workers. And we have mandatory group sessions where you don't have to talk, but a conversation about things that we suspect are affecting you is going to be had, and you're going to be present in the hopes that you can pick up the tools and no one has to force you to, go to a place you're not ready to go to. And so that's the kind of practical, non-technical support
that's
we put into it.
Therapy via osmosis. Some people are in a room talking about their feelings. I am also there. Maybe some of that will seep in. I like that.
Yeah. And if you look straight ahead, and Black people don't blush, so you're not going to turn red, no one will know that we're talking exactly about you.
Right.
And so that's just keep it together, but you'll pick up some, something there, and then we'll hand out the literature after. So you can go back and read it. But essentially, we're hoping that we're getting you on a journey where you start to probe these things that are fundamental barriers often to your ability to progress. And then within the training environment, when our first year students join, so the first 8-month block, the students in the second 8-month block, we select individuals with high EQ and high academic performance. And the EQ we measure from how their teams rate them.
Emotional
good listener,
quotient.
good communicator. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Emotional quotient. And based on how they've been rated by their peers on these aspects that are important in supporting another person's learning, we select a few that are tech mentors. So on day one, on arriving at the academy, you're put in a group of 8, which is intentionally a diverse group by age, by gender, by race, by socioeconomic background, by academic past experiences. We try to muddle it up by as much of what we know about you as we can. And we assign you a mentor. And you have to meet once a week. And you have to do presentations in that circle. We start out with pichakuchas about yourself. So if you want to talk about oranges, go ahead, talk about oranges, 20 slides, 20 seconds per slide. And we're trying to get you out of your shell.
Oh, and because life is a big group project, right? You're putting people into group projects because work is a group project.
Exactly. And so the sooner you get there, and then also it means on day one, you don't have to go make friends. We give you your first set of friends. And so it's very intimidating to arrive on this campus. You're dealing with the whole computer mental block. You've got your insecurities, imposter syndrome is on high alert. And now I must walk up to Scott and say, "Hi, I'm Nyari. Where are you from?" That's a lot. So now we put you in a group and we create an environment where you immediately have a community, and your interaction in that community is facilitated by a pragmatic, sensible someone. And so once a week you meet and you discuss in the beginning just how you're adjusting, and you also discuss the material that's being served up to you. And so all of these interventions are in place to try and create an environment where before you even switch on the computer, there are things to help you, thrive in there. So why people drop off is, in spite of the aptitude, they're not really, really enjoying it. And so as they get to know more about software, it's just really not for them. So that's one of the reasons we get a few in discipline, because it's a lot of work. So you've got to show up, and you've got to keep showing up, and you've got to keep showing up. And the feedback loops are short and tight and specific. So you've got to keep, coming into this environment and going. And while there are guardrails to, keep you on track, not everybody can make it. And then with a few others, life happens. So our last 2 cohorts have both graduated above 80%. Of the people that enter the program actually graduate having successfully completed the coursework and with the official accreditation. And so we feel like that's a pretty decent throughput, but we're always watching to see ways to either make sure we're bringing in the right people or supporting the people when they come in.
And is it true that the number of folks that do graduate that get jobs is in the high 90s?
It's 92% is our track record for employment placement. So Within 3 months of graduating the program, 92% of our students end up permanently employed. And so it's exciting. I mean, we were doing the chart, so I'm going to have to do like a quick calculation, but when 60% of the students that enter our academy are coming from a household that earns collectively 75,000 rands per annum, and a household has probably got about 5 people, so that's $4,000 per annum spread across 5 people. That's when they join the academy. When the same individual leaves the academy, they're making at least 240,000 rands per annum, which is $13,000. So a 16-month intervention in their lives literally takes them from the poverty line for 60% of our students to a point where it's still not easy, but it's doable. And then within the next 3 to 4 years, that income will at least double. And so what we're finding is that the intervention is actually meaningful for the individual, meaningful for their family, and then meaningful for society, because we're moving a lot of people that would have gone another way because the opportunities aren't available into a space where they're productive and adding value. And so that gives me goosebumps. When we did that chart the first time, I was like, whoa, I mean, that's huge.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Nyari, for hanging out with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to chat.
You can learn more about WeThinkCode at WeThinkCode.co.za. They also take donations. If you're here in the US and you're listening to us, you can make a donation from a link on their site and get your tax deductions. And if you are in South Africa, I'm sure you can stop by and help out. They are providing essential components to their students' development like laptops and a stipend. There's amazing stuff happening all over South Africa as they provide young South Africans with equal access to higher education. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.